Welcome to the Dank Christian Memes podcast. Dank Christian Memes is a community on reddit.com where all kinds of Christians and all kinds of non-Christians share memes and fellowship. Our podcast covers topics related to faith, culture, current events, and Reddit. Thank you for listening. Okay. Hey, Troy.
Hey.
Hey, it's great to hear your voice. We worked very hard to be able to hear Troy's voice.
This is a lot of trials and tribulations for me to get here, apparently.
So we have been doing me and Jacob, I think we've been doing this sort of epistemological kick on just different ways of looking at knowledge and how we know things. And I feel like this is the logical conclusion to come to conspiracy theories and see how this fits in. So first, I'm going to start with a definition, and we can pick this definition apart. I literally just Google searched it, and this is what comes up. Conspiracy theory is a belief that some secret but influential organization is responsible for an event or phenomena. So, and we're going to talk about this first. It's not necessarily a conspiracy theory that you believe in aliens, but if you believe the government is keeping aliens secret, or maybe the aliens are keeping themselves secret, therein is the conspiracy theory. So you can believe all sorts of wacky things. That doesn't necessarily make it a conspiracy theory. So I figured I'd talk about my exposure, and then you guys can share sort of like where you're coming from. So like my first exposure was being a kid, bored on weekends, finding what I would call UFO shows that like I knew were bunk. Like I wasn't like, oh yeah, the aliens are out there and they're coming for me. I also had a bedroom in a basement, so like all the stories about being abducted, I'm like, I'd like to see him try.
You're safe.
But it was like there was something fun about it, and like the way it was presented was engaging. So I thought that was neat and that was fun. And obviously, there's no shortage of pop culture references to aliens that we can get into with you, Troy. But then like they started being less fun when I was older. So when I was in grad school, when I was in seminary, I knew I wanted to do digital ministry and wanted to see what faith looks like in digital spaces and how we can try to organize ourselves to enjoy faith in that way. I'll date myself by saying I was doing a lot of work on Google Plus, which is a defunct, does not exist anymore. Castor Troy remembers well.
That. I remember
I was an alpha or a beta tester, and Castor Troy had to live with me when that was happening. So that was an experience.
Oh, you were so excited.
I've done beta testing for a lot of things, but this is the first time I did it for something major, and I had a lot of fun on it. But it turns out I was the only one that Google Plus didn't have a lot of people, and it turns out you need that for a social network. But what they did have is people, or at least accounts, that were constantly talking about conspiracy theories. And what I would find is I would be trying to go into like, We Love God Christian group, whether it's on Facebook or Google Plus. And I'd find that all these Christian groups, they'd have their daily devotional, they'll have their, praise God, little not so dank Christian memes that our grandmas enjoy. And then there'd be like long narratives about how the devil is stealing kids and like a lot of focus on the devil to like the point where like your story is problematic because you're giving the devil more power than God has, which is like a bit of a theological conundrum. So like I found myself, so this is where I'm owning my bias. I, for a while, couldn't stand conspiracy theories and couldn't understand these people that held to them. That every time I wanted to talk about faith, someone else wanted to talk about, Satan and the Illuminati or something. So for a very long time, I kind of hated it. I kind of hated conspiracy theories. I have to say I've gotten softer, especially because, thank God, I don't run into a lot of conspiracy theories on Dank Christian memes, not in earnest. Occasionally someone will say birds aren't real, and I just kind of pretend I didn't see it. I'm it's the opposite of where I started. So it's a lot easier for me to be tolerant of conspiracy theories and folks who really want to spread those theories when I don't see it every day. So that's my range. What's your position, Castor Troy? How did you see any of those UFO shows? I think they were the Learning Channel, Discovery, and History Channel. I guess it was a bit of foreshadowing for History Channel, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it's weird. So just kind of doing my bio on conspiracy theory. So I come from two kind of schools of thought. So my family was very active. My elders were very active in the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories that ran in that ultimately, not all of them, but a lot of them were confirmed, like government conspiracies against.
There's a lot of dark stories out there.
Yeah, it's a lot, and there's like factual things you can look up about the FBI, like planting people and drugs and weapons in certain areas. Like that stuff it's there. So I come from a school of thought where I had people like, hey, beware of the government. They are planning things against us, specifically us, and that sort of thing. And then you find out like years later in unsealed documents, oh yeah, they actually were doing that. Grandparents are right. And then on the other side of that is, I would also see the same alien conspiracy theories where it's like, the government tied in this, and that. And so as you get older and I got older and I got that nugget of truth from conspiracy theories, like, oh, okay, so there is some fact-based stuff to the government kind of hiding, concealing, diverting information away from the people. And then you get older and realize, like, that's just kind of how governments work. And it's not so much that they're hiding the grandest of schemes. And I like to fast forward to today where it's now the government has all but confirmed, like, yes, alien, like extraterrestrial life in some sense exists. We've been tracking it. We might have had aircraft and things that have come around and about. And people look at it and like as a general public, we all just said, and that's why the government doesn't necessarily hide it. They just don't tell us because it's really boring. Because we all think of it as a grand thing where it's like, oh, they're hiding green men with mass intelligence. Like, no, it's just a random ship that we can't quite, a thing that we can't quite identify. And neither can you. And so we as a people, and this is kind of where stories and fables and a lot of religion comes from, when our brains can't figure something out, we need to create a reason for why we can't figure it out other than, oh, this might not be smart enough or this might be too boring. And so I grew up kind of with the family, we talked that stuff out. And I said, we just don't understand this. So that's where we're going to stop talking about it and we're going to start listening. And for me, it's like the conspiracy theorist goes, no, I don't understand this. And I'm going to just start talking. And I'm going to keep talking until some of this makes sense to somebody. So that's where I stand in conspiracy theories and kind of what my purview on it is.
Well, and it's a weird situation, right? Because there's truth in the fiction and fiction in the truth, right? So, like, I think the civil rights movement is a perfect example. I think it's known, it may even be available, that Martin Luther King was surveilled, like, and all his phone calls were listened to, and that's just a thing that we know. But it doesn't mean they're listening to me. As like just because it happened to MLK doesn't mean he's listening to everyone's conversation the same way. But it's tricky when you do have that evidence.
They sent him mail to try to convince him to kill himself. Like all sorts of things happen. You
could at least show up in person if you're going to do that. Don't Yeah. So sorry. Obviously, I'm taking issue with the wrong thing on this. But conspiracy theories, like I want to acknowledge that. Like I said, I kind of hate them sometimes, but like a lot of times it's because there's something like kind of true that points in a direction, and it becomes more understandable if frustrating when a person goes there. Jacob, we talked about your kind of experience growing up in a unique faith situation. Do you feel like any conspiracy theories came along with that, or was it not until you came out onto the internet that all these rabbit holes presented themselves?
Oh, I've seen conspiracy theories my entire life in my environment. They have been cited to me within the last week. It's common in some of these evangelical circles to really be looking for signs of the end times. And so a lot of conspiracy theories relate to that. How is Satan setting up things for the coming of the Antichrist, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of Satan sneaks in, is the revelation watching.
Yeah. And so a lot of it is that sort of thing where it's like, ooh, what are the elites setting up? When will they start persecuting Christians, right? That sort of stuff. The idea that there's a big plot to destroy Christianity, and depending on how close to 9/11 you are, it's either like atheism or Islam that is plotting in the background there. Or if you're hanging out with the wrong crowd, it's the Jews. But these
and
are
we
all
will cover that.
yeah. It's all the same stuff, right? It's a paranoid reaction that everything needs to be read to arrive at this end times narrative that is based on a very culturally specific and fringe reading of the Book of Revelation that exists almost entirely within the United States. But yeah, it's I've grown up with that forever. I think that as a kid, I was probably fairly open to the idea that things were crawling that direction, but I didn't really believe there were plots behind it because it would be weird to me. Like, young me sort of thought it would be weird if something was foretold in prophecy and it needed everyone consciously going for that end, seemingly knowing that they need to do evil task and will be sent to hell for it. Like, that doesn't sound like a very reasonable conspiracy. Like, if your baddies are all hanging out and they're like, okay guys, we need a one world government that persecutes Christians as described in their book, and we have to convince them it's not happening. We know this. Let's do exactly that and get condemned to hell, right? Like that's a completely nonsense.
It seems pretty out in the open. Like, hey, that thing they're afraid of? Let's do exactly that.
Right. So I was
not
always
only that, but
skeptical
every
about
mass
that.
conspiracy. Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry. Every mass conspiracy falls apart once you fast forward it to modern times and technology. Like, even today, if you tried to get a group of, let's say, 8 friends together to go to dinner, when they say they want to go to dinner, that exchange takes hours and trials and tribulations. Now imagine a global version of that with multiple agencies and people trying to operate on one plan without smartphones. They're doing this by teletype and letters. Every mass conspiracy falls apart once you imagine, oh yeah, people actually have to try to pull this off. That's not going to work. It falls apart immediately.
Yeah.
The issue of scale. Void Boy, we haven't had you on in a little while. What's your level of exposure with conspiracy theories? Did you grow up in a culture that had certain beliefs? I feel like with one of you can't trust the government, and I feel like a lot of people have beliefs that kind of stem from that because it's sort of a pre-existing consensus that the government isn't super trustworthy. Did you have anything like that floating around, or did you come into the internet like a green young child walking into 4chan having no idea what you were about to do?
For me, growing up as Jehovah's Witness, there was a lot of distrust against the government. They would constantly talk about how Jehovah's Witness would win legal battles to practice their religion. So there was this framing as the government will be adversarial because it has historically stopped us from doing our practice, and then it will. I'm saying I'm not in it anymore, but when I was in the cult, it was like they're gonna try to stop practicing our religion, and they will do it in the future. So we have to be kind of ready. And then they would sometimes talk about other countries, most significantly Russia, how they would literally bust down doors and arrest people for simply being in the room talking about Jehovah. So yeah, there was that kind of fear that the government is going to spring out at any moment and somehow say Jehovah's Witness was illegal or whatever. So in my head, yes, I was kind of thought that conspiracies about governments trying to assassinate people they don't like. In my head, that's perfectly reasonable because why would I? If they would stoop so low as to stop people from practicing religion, assassinating is one step further. So it wasn't hard for me to not be skeptical when people talk about things like government assassinations or plots or stop people. Also, like the Jehovah's Witness also phrase this thing as like having a mass conspiracy as well, almost like in Armageddon. You know, it's like things are gonna happen in this sort of the world's governments are gonna come together and sort of stop Christianity somehow, or like they're gonna go against God, and it's like they literally frame it as the governments will physically wage war on God, similar to how Fox News says they're gonna wage war on Christmas. It's the same vibe.
And I think that kind of encompasses a lot of the satanic panic part, which we'll come back to later. But like this idea that there's been historical circumstances of Christians being persecuted, and many modern Christians kind of carry that burden, whether or not they've shouldered it upon themselves or not is up to anyone to decide. But so here's the thing, and Castor Troy, I think you mentioned this a little bit, so correct me if I misunderstand, that there's actual conspiracies. You know, there are stuff that happens, the government does shady things, that people are paid to keep things secret, sure. But it's not always something that people actually care about. So, for instance, I feel like in the 1960s and 70s, oh man, the government, they spied on MLK, they spied on Malcolm X, they spy on everybody. They're spying on us all the time. That's scary. I'm scared the government is gonna track me, right? Well, now we know, between the Edward Snowden leaks and just how social media works and finances itself, that we are living in a dystopia where maybe not the government, but many entities can find out and could inform the government. No one really seems to care. like there seems to be like a level, like, and I think that that's something interesting about the conspiracy theory, right? That this is going to blow up and it's going to be big. So like, I think you were talking about the aliens and the UFO stuff and how like the government is not even being as cagey as maybe they were when I was a kid watching my little sort of documentaries, but not really. But like, if aliens are not immediately coming to shoot us like an Independence Day, do we even care? What is that? Is that the real problem? That whether or not there's aliens, only some of us care.
And honestly, that's with most things. It's a weird byproduct of this information age that we live in now, where when we were kids, we were like, oh my God, we're going to have all this information at our disposal. We're going to find out all these great new things. And we did. And then we found out, yeah, most people, like, again, this stuff is either kind of boring or most people just don't care. People are going to go on about their lives as normal, because what else can you do? Like, if you're a random small business owner or just a parent in middle America and you find out aliens here, are they attacking us? No. All right, I still got to go to work. Like, what am I supposed to do with this information? And that's where a lot of conspiracies kind of fall apart, especially today, where we have access to so much information, and we can.
What am I supposed to do about it?
What am I supposed to do about it? Yeah, so it all ends up like in the same plate as everything else that you just kind of hear, tune it in, then tune it back out to go back to what matters specifically to you.
I think also with the alien thing, we tend to like popularly grossly misread where people's standings are. If you look at polls, the vast majority of people, educated or uneducated, believe in life elsewhere in the universe at this point. It's one of those things that just from a understanding of the natural sciences tends to lead towards.
There's a bacteria out there somewhere, probably. It's maybe like, a mold somewhere.
If life can form on Earth, it can form elsewhere, right? But the thing is, so a lot of people will ask
about it, and they've said,
yeah, and a lot of people will ask those questions. They'll poll people, and people hear the question, "Do you believe in aliens?" in two different ways. One says, "Do you believe in life in the universe?" The other says, "Do you believe the grays that probe my neighbor's butthole?" Right? Like, these are two entirely different things. One is in the realm of scientific hypothesis, and the other is in the realm of elf folklore. Sorry if that's a little judgmental.
This is the perfect transition point, if you guys don't mind. So we're talking about what am I supposed to do about it? And I have the question, as I look at any conspiracy theory, where does this fall on the scale? Is it harmful or is it fun? Is it misleading, or is it just weird? And as far as I can tell, believing in aliens to whatever extent, whether you think they're on your front doorstep, looking in through your window, or on the other side of the universe, is not an inherently harmful belief. Unless someone organizes some sort of raid on Area 51 thinking that they can liberate the aliens. Jacob, do you remember the quote-unquote raid on Area 51? That may have been more of a meme, but that seems to be the only example of people doing something because they believed in aliens, other than talking about stuff.
I mean, there's other examples. This is just the one that hangs out in recent memories, but there are far worse examples. I would also point out the number of UFO religions that are out there. The Heaven's Gate is sort of the extreme example.
Comet. Yeah, I was thinking of that.
And you know, Scientology also, where these ideas do enter an explicitly spiritualist and religious territory, and people act on them in similar fashions, sometimes but in benign ways and sometimes in extreme ways. When you see things like, if you watch New Age content like from Gaia, if you wanna subscribe to the Gaia streaming service and melt your neurons into goo, they give a week free trial. It's worth it. They have all sorts of things where the idea is that aliens have access to higher consciousness and whatnot, right? That is an explicitly spiritual belief. That is not remotely in the realm of astrobiology. That's the idea that aliens have a religion that we should follow. And so, like, I think it does go a lot further for a lot of people. I've known people who are incredibly into the UFO phenomenon and frame their entire worldview about it. And obviously, as an archaeologist, I also have feelings on a specific brand of that I think, like, does everything to dilute the scientific veracity of of popular archaeology, which is the ancient aliens phenomenon. It is absolutely harmful to our educational system that people believe this, because on an
informational level, it's problematic.
On an informational level, the fact that people will forgo scientific and objective standards for analyzing these things has huge social and intellectual implications for society at large. Maybe it doesn't affect it as broadly as some worse things like Great Replacement or whatever. But
let's look at that. Let's look at that outside of the context of academia. So when we look at the storming of Area 51, which is in fact not a storming of Area 51.
It was a party. It was a party.
But I'm on the wiki. Obviously, this isn't the most in-depth journalism I'm offering you right here. It seems like it was a music festival. There were a few French people who got close to borderlines and returned back. Well, maybe one arrest of a person, but like the subset was less than 20. But the National Guard and the local government, like this is an area that doesn't usually get a lot of people at all. So they did need to mobilize a security response to what looks like a really great time. The music concert has very multicolored lights. Apparently there were, it seemed like it was a cultural event, and it makes me feel like this is a group of people with a story but no campfire. That a few of them thought they were going to go get the government, and they were sorely mistaken. But most people wanted to party. So is that what it really comes down to?
I think this is more Zoomer internet culture than it is the ufology phenomenon. I think it's just a totally different thing, to be honest.
We talked about how the government is spying on us, and then they decided to organize a party, and then the government showed up.
Yeah.
All right.
You can see people hanging out with the guards. It's actually kind of funny.
It looks honestly, it looks like a pretty good time unless you're the like 10 or 20 people who like really thought you were going to liberate an alien. Like those, I think those people had a pretty rough weekend. But so this is going to be. I love it when it's fun, right? So I look at the alien stories. I look at the stories I saw when I was growing up, and I look at this. What looks like a really rager of a party, and that's fun to me. But some of it isn't. So, like, I want to talk about Stargate in a minute, but I want to go first to the protocols of the Elders of Zion, because I want to talk about how something like as like silly and fun as aliens sometimes becomes weird and racist. I've seen that happen in weird corners and places. So, like. As we're talking about this media stuff, I want to go way back and first start by saying that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a forgery. It is not it is not what people purport for it to be. Jacob, do you want to give us a little bit more detail on the origins of it?
Yeah.
And then
so
I think I can speak more to the I know it's like a knee-jerk thing, but it's going to keep coming up. So let's we have Jewish space lasers that we need to discuss. So this is part of how we're getting there.
This is one of those things that the tone is about to go way down. I've covered this on a podcast before, and it's not one of those fun topics, but if you want to talk about the history of modern anti-Semitism, this is sort of the foundational text of what modern anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are based on. Not that they didn't exist before. They've existed for centuries. But there's a certain mode they take nowadays, and they are sort of established largely in part by this 1903 book that was originally published in Russia, late Russian Empire, known for its anti-Semitic pogroms and forcing Jews to settle in the Pale of Settlement, that one. And basically, it is a text that is supposedly discussing a Jewish plan for global domination. It is... When it says the elders...
And I just want to say that theme, that Jewish folks are bent on global domination, comes up so much that it is often the connecting thread between various modern conspiracy theories that I sincerely believe the impact of this thing is very real today, even though the document itself being a fakeroo, right? But it's like more than 100 years old, is it, at this point?
Yeah, it is 120 years old this year. And
a shit post that just got way out of control.
Well, it wasn't even a shit post, to be honest. This is definitely like targeted in a time where people in the Russian Empire were going into Jewish neighborhoods and killing people. This was an ideologically driven document. But basically, the idea was that so Zionism obviously was taking off. Then we have early Zionism. And people distrusted this idea of a Jewish political movement. It gave a name to anti-Semitic ideas that had already been fostering about...
To anyone who doesn't
Jewish
know,
political action.
Zionism is the idea that the Jewish people, or perhaps some Jewish people, should have their own nation. And if you've been paying attention for the last 50 plus years, they do. And not everyone likes that. So that's why Zionism is still a term that, depending on who's using it and how, can point in some weird directions. Yeah,
and keep in mind that early Zionists were motivated largely by the fact that a lot of these countries had such prominent anti-Semitic currents going on in them. But the protocols were translated pretty early, because when they took off in Russia, other people noticed, and they thought, oh, look, this is a Jewish document that should be spread around. One of the influential figures who was interested in spreading it in the U.S. was actually Henry Ford. Henry Ford was a quite notable anti-Semite who went around basically promoting against Jewish presence in the United States.
Ford and Nixon
so much
were
so,
both. They served together, and they were both pretty anti-Semitic. Is that right?
Not Gerald Ford. This is Henry Ford. This is
Henry Ford.
The car guy.
Okay.
The car guy.
Oh, the car guy. Okay.
Much earlier.
That might be worse somehow. Okay.
Henry Ford was so instrumental in this that he is praised in Mein Kampf by Hitler for these.
Holy crap!
Yeah, for this effort.
What's the opposite of a letter of recommendation? Like
a letter of condemnation, I guess. 2 years later, the British did an investigation. They were like, this document is fake and connects to nothing. But it already appealed to an English-speaking audience because it refers to things like the William McKinley assassination, which had happened just years before its initial publication, as like being organized by a Jewish plot, right? When the Nazis took over Germany, they used the document as a teaching tool. They presented it as fact in their school systems as a model for what was supposedly going on in the Jewish plot. And because of that, Hitler's whole narrative, Hitler was influenced by it ahead of time already, but the whole narrative that we hear from Nazi Germany about the Jewish plot is heavily modeled on this text. And of course, the end result of that was a destruction of a third of the world's Jewish population at the time.
And I want to take it a step back further, and I also want to mention Martin Luther, because he and others participated in a long history of anti-Semitism, whether it be German or Russian or otherwise, and that Luther wrote, being a Protestant myself, Luther wrote a lot of things that I agree with. His book on the Jews, on the other hand, is not not among them. And as we spoke to Dr. A.J. Levine in one of our earlier episodes, we talked about this, and she said at first Paul, liked Jewish people, but when they refused
Luther,
to...
you mean, right?
What's
Paul
that?
was a Jew. You said Paul.
Well, he was, right, but he was a Jesus-believing Jew, and he...
I thought you were still talking about... Okay, I thought you were talking about Luther still. I was like...
No.
Wait,
these arguments go back really far, and we can see these arguments taking place in the Bible. We can see these arguments being presented in passion plays, probably before Luther's time and after. That this is a repetitious anti-Semitic theme, and as far as I can see, it's very. It is sometimes the connective tissue between conspiracy theories, I think, because it goes back so far and it's been iterated on so many times. So I want to transition to Stargate, but do you think we've missed anything on the protocols? I feel like if you come into a conspiracy space and you don't know a little bit about the history of anti-Semitism, boy, it's easy to get caught up in anti-Semitism. Yeah. So I want to make sure that's it's kind of an unavoidable part of the conspiracy space on the internet, as I've understood it for the past 15 plus years.
Yeah, and we should be careful about where. Yeah.
So I was gonna say, to that level, that is a huge part of just conspiracy theories, but modern conspiracies in general. Is how normalized so many ideas have become that are born out of conspiracies, because they're separated from the conspiracy at that point, and then it's just like, oh, this is just news that was out there. Then you follow that rabbit hole, and I was like, dude, this comes from very racist, anti-Semitic text, and people. But because it's so like we just said, the Protocols is 120 years old this year, 120 years old at this point. How many people are parrot things that come specifically from that text that we know to be fabricated, but they've heard it in another context? So they don't even cite back to those protocols. And I think that's the biggest danger of of conspiracy theories that start literally from hate is once they get enough traction, people just say it and they don't realize that that's what it's born of anymore. And that's the scary part.
Right. You can scroll down Facebook feeds. If you never filter your Facebook feed, you can find material from this all the time and just things people still think, right?
So this is the thing I want to keep in mind as we go forward, that conspiracy theories are and can, and in my opinion, should be fun, but sometimes they inspire the Holocaust. So, like, we need to be realistic about that and tamper our fun a little bit. I want to come back to you, Troy, and then Void Boy. I'd love to hear your point of view on this from a more artistic perspective. There, in my view, there's a very clear sort of almost like a rotation of conspiracy theories to media, to more conspiracy theories to media, that it seems like there's a feeding cycle. And I think Stargate is a perfect example. So I'm just going to do, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theory crazy person simply by describing the core plot. I'm going to try not to give away any spoilers. So I finished watching all of Stargate. I watched the original movie, the 10 seasons of the TV show. There's been a writer's strike. Great time to catch up on that. And the 2 movies that complete it. And it's all just a soup of conspiracy theories, but it's done in a way that's fun. Well, I think. So you tell me how fun or scary or weird any of this sounds. The idea is that aliens built the pyramids. Tell me if you've heard this one before. But the pyramids weren't spaceships themselves. The pyramids were just landing platforms for the aliens to land their spaceships on. These aliens, they're not like the Greys you've heard about. They're parasites, kind of like snakes or lampreys, perhaps. They take human bodies as hosts, often by going in behind your neck in like the most terrifying fashion imaginable. All non-Earth humans who are spread about the galaxy are slaves. And that's why they're spread about the galaxy, because the aliens rule over the galaxy and expect all humans to worship them as gods. So any human could be a victim of the alien parasite and be completely under their control and their mind and actions, and you wouldn't know it unless they chose to reveal themselves. And the 2 ways the aliens reveal themselves as having taken control of a human host is by having big, scary, glowy eyes that are really great before you cut to commercial, and an unnatural, scary voice that if I knew anything about voice, like I would do it myself and add it to this podcast. It's not hard to do, but I'm not a smart person. So I'm sorry I can't add myself as having an alien voice from Stargate. So to me, this sounded like great fun. It was a great series. I enjoyed it a lot. I watched it with my wife. Finally got to finish it. Ran from 1997 to 2007. But there was a post that I shared with you guys, someone saying, "Is Stargate real?" So that post didn't get a lot of upvotes, but boy, did it get a lot of comments. So Castor Troy, and again, Void Boy, I want to come back to your view on this alone as well. To what extent does the media sort of have a relationship, like this sort of handshake with our conspiracy theories, because there are our folklore? Or is the media sort of pushing our narratives more than we realize because good storytelling works?
So short answer is yes. That last part, yes. So I'm going to answer your question with a story from my childhood. So at one point, my mom was dating a guy who was super into specifically into weird pop culture conspiracy theories. Like that's how his brain worked. He was also a massive pothead, if that filters anything out. But he would often say stuff like, "Hey, Troy, think of the first time you ever saw an alien. I bet it was in a cartoon." And when I was like 12, I was like, "Yeah, man, that's mind blowing stuff." I was like, "No, of course the first time I saw an alien would be in a cartoon because at freaking 12, I mostly watch cartoons. That's when I'm going to see that sort of thing." But his whole point was that the media was training us because of a handshake between he would go with the Illuminati and all the Jewish people that run Hollywood understand the government behind the scenes. That was literally how he talked to a child. And he said they know the stuff, so they try to put it in our entertainment to prepare us for when it actually happens, or to at least give us hints so that way we could do something. I say all that to say this. When something like Stargate comes out and people go, "Man, is Stargate real? Is the government really working on things that go to different dimensions because there's actually the slave and the slave world and different dimensions and all X, Y, and Z?" No, What it is that somebody saw something that was based in reality, which is ancient Egypt was really good with arithmetic and had slave labor, so they built the pyramids, which lined up with constellations and did all this sorts of stuff. But because we can't understand that, or we don't want to put that two and two together, it's like, yeah, they've had a bunch of time and information, so they did stuff like this. We make it into a grand conspiracy that equals aliens and powers, and it's like, no, they just they understood math, and they had slave labor.
I love the story, but I also keenly remember one of my clearest educational memories would be I was in the back of my 6th grade social studies class, and there to the right all year, because that's where I sat all year, was a poster describing exactly how they made the pyramids. And it was like, yep, seems like when you got enough slaves, you can really work it out.
Yeah, it's so here's the thing about the pyramids.
If you talk to certain people to this day, they'll go, yeah, we don't understand how they made the pyramids. Like, yeah, we do. You just don't read. Like, we have all these books that told us exactly how they did it.
Yeah, no, this is what bothers me all the time with ancient alien people is it's like they're not interested in the topic. Because we have literal temporary towns that were built on the Giza Plateau to house massive labor forces. We have masons' marks by the masons. We have a diary by a stone worker who is working on the pyramids. We have the names of the architects who built it. We have the we have a progression in the development of pyramids from mastabas to the step pyramids and bent pyramids to the Giza pyramids to the later pyramids in Meroe and whatnot, right? Like all of this exists. There's even writings on the inside of the pyramids that talk about what they were doing. There's the pyramid texts. Some of the oldest Egyptian literature is preserved in walls because stone preserves things well. My constant frustration as like an archaeology guy, I'm talking in this chat with a pharaoh profile pic. I know what I'm about. Is that like ancient astronaut theory is best defeated by a genuine interest in the topic and like an interest in reading about it, because you realize how quickly the claims just fall away to things that are completely known. I feel like shows like Ancient Aliens, which, by the way, if you go to the Stargate movie and go to its special features on the DVD, there's a talk by Eric von Daniken, who popularized the modern form of the ancient astronaut theory. They are very much in cahoots. They're 100%.
Yeah, Daniel Jackson is that character. And he's supposed to be a laughingstock who's secretly vindicated because the government works with him, but obviously he has to be a laughingstock publicly.
They're totally profiting off each other. But I totally think, because Von Daniken, if you read his book Chariots of the Gods, holy crap, that thing is a nightmare. He'll talk about things he went and saw, and then they conveniently disappeared, so you can't check them in caves in South America.
And that's one other thing I want to mention. So we talked about, we talk about Stargate, which is still mostly aliens and pyramids, but is it dangerous? And from what I can tell, watching the Stargate TV show, there's nothing dangerous about it. It talks about themes of slavery and liberation in various forms, but it doesn't do so from a racial angle or anything like that. But I have seen and heard conferences. I've listened to some podcasts. I don't go to these conferences where people they insist that the aliens are all representative of different races of humans and that every race of humans is related to a race of aliens. And you can see how very racist this becomes very quickly. So again, I want to acknowledge that I had great fun with Stargate, but someone else went out there and wrote a completely different book that made it way racist for no particular reason.
Yeah. But
so
also
you hit the nail that I was going to get to.
Yeah.
Sorry, good. The delay throws me off. Sorry. No, I was going to say it's there's you hit the nail on the head there. The story of Stargate in and of itself, it can skirt around some racist otherism stuff. It's like, oh yeah, there of course there's ancient technological other dimension alien races based off of the Egyptians, because that's kind of how we see. Oh my God, how the Egyptians pulled this off? They got to be aliens. So somebody can run with that story, like you said, in a very fun way. But then somebody can then look at that fun story and go, no, there's a nugget of truth to that, because it doesn't make sense that we have all these different races. And yeah, like you're right, it spirals into that otherism very quickly in a very ugly way. But that's not Stargate's fault. That's like the tool that I don't want to call art a tool in this way, but me coming up with a piece of art that's entertaining and that somebody interpreting that in a different way and then splintering off. Yes, I might be the diving board, but they still chose to dive into the racist pool, and I wasn't even there for that. Like, I just wanted to be a regular pool. They made it.
We got to close the racist pool, man. Just if we could just get people out of that pool. So, Void Boy, this is the question I want to ask you. So I feel like we definitely have a situation here with life imitating art, imitating life, imitating art. Is this something that we should just look at as always happened? Or do you think because of the time we're living that like this is happening at a different rate? Or are you being commissioned to do a bunch of alien and UFO art because that's all people are talking about on Reddit? What's your position?
But was that to me? Sorry.
Seems like his mic is off. We may have talked him to death.
Wow.
Are you back? Did we talk you to death?
Yeah,
Are you okay?
No, I'm good. So this sort of things happens all the time in art history. Specifically now, today is just accelerated because thanks to memes and I think for a better part, how fast information can just get. People can just do like a badly done Photoshop job and that's enough. I think people, I feel like in terms of like making art and making culture, people want very simple and easy to digest stories and information. And when you look into the history of the world and the history of like, ancient life and, all of the problems that we have today, they're incredibly complicated. They're very nuanced. And if you really study it, the answers are very boring. It's just humans being incredibly awful to each other. And that's really where it comes down. There is no like, you're not special. This isn't a magical thing. But that isn't, I don't know, fun. And people want to be entertained. People want to feel special. So that's why the need of making art that is centered around this idea of you are important and you are correct. So here is something that kind of here's a piece of art that kind of validates that point, even though it's not.
People are always going to be attracted to art that sort of validates them.
Yeah. They just want to see if there's enough people that feel a certain way that they want to be represented and seen in a certain way, they're going to make art about it no matter what. That's not going to stop them. Even if they're completely incorrect, that doesn't matter. Like I'm trying to think of ideas of like stuff that's like super wrong, but that people just still kind of make a lot of image about that.
I got you. This is the perfect segue, and I'd love to know what your level of awareness of this is, Void Boy, or if this is the first you've heard it. Is that sure. I have found, so I'm going to shift towards the Satanic Panic, and I have found that Satanic Panic and like a lot of Illuminati stuff is just kind of the same thing. With maybe we're just using different names or different dog whistles. But from what I can tell, we're actually, when we say Satanic Panic, we're talking about two things, possibly both, that either what we talked about before, stuff like from the Super Bowl when you're like, oh, there's satanic imagery, or I think this group may be satanic, versus like schools and daycares are abusing children for ritual sacrifice. And there was a period, especially in the UK in the 80s. Hold on, I should be looking at my wiki page so I don't misspeak. I mean, it goes back way far, but the most recent example of it is a period when I was, sort of alive. It was big in the UK, and the UK has this problem where they don't have the highest standards in some of their psychiatric support systems, or at least they didn't at that time. So there were a lot of people who were like, oh yeah, okay, devils and people are attacking children. We need to do something. So it became very messy. Many people were accused of things that were ridiculous, and it doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's sort of like sort of seen as the modern Salem witch trial. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone was killed or anything, but I think people lost their careers and were held guilty in the court of public opinion. But this is a pervasive, so I feel like we've seen a rise of, schools, can they really be trusted with your kids? And so I feel like all these things are mixing together, and the satanic panic is really at the core. And when I see a guy who thinks, oh man, Hillary Clinton and her people are are sacrificing children at a pizza place because pizza means assaulting children for some reason, I'm not sure. And that someone felt the need to go to this place, which I believe is called Comet Pizza. I don't know if their pizza is any good. The article doesn't say. Thinking this guy was convinced, and, perhaps he was a little prone to convincing, that there were kids being abused in the basement. He believed that satanic things were happening in the basement of this pizza place that did not have a basement. So, I feel like for most people, hearing about the Illuminati doesn't make them go out and do something, but there has been that guy. And so, I feel like we see this a lot in a more wink and nod way in America, where people are very scrupulous, especially older people who don't have kids in the school system. They're very suspicious of schools. So I'm wondering if anyone else has noticed that, or if because I work in schools as my day job, maybe I'm just feeling a little vulnerable and attacked.
I work in schools too. I see it all the time. It's bizarre. They even in local politics, people try to get council positions and stuff to forward this. And all it usually has to do with queer fear, I guess, unintentional rhyme there. Where parents are convinced that their children are going to be exposed to things and then turn out queer, as if that is actually going to change anything. Here's a pro tip for parents listening. There is nothing we can do in the school system to make your kid queer at all. If we wanted to, we couldn't.
We can't even get them to do their homework. How could we get them to do anything that friends?
It's like a friend of mine. Sorry, whoever's listening to this. It had shared the other day on Facebook. Something was like, oh, I went to college. What did I learn? And then just a pride flag. No, if you've ever actually been to college, you realize that isn't what most of your classes are going to center around. The reason people come away from college with opinions where they're open to LGBT rights is because they meet people who are affected by those issues. That's all it is. It's
so you're saying it's not a conspiracy, it's sympathy on a large level
outside.
That confuses people without sympathy.
It's having experience. Yes, it's literally that. It's going outside and seeing that there's more than your little bubble. That's just what it is, right? That's why there's parents panicking about homeschool and whatnot. But honestly, if you're genuinely, in a way, worried about what your kids are being taught at school, just talk with them about it. It's that easy. They're going to experience. Yeah, they're going to experience the outside world anyway. Hypothetically, you should be preparing them for that.
Well, I've noticed for a lot of parents, sort of like you said, the assumption that college equals gay indoctrination for some reason, that I've noticed a countercultural movement, and I'm sure it's been around for a while, of homeschooling. And I think it got a big push under COVID when those restrictions were going on. And I think that a lot of Christians grabbed onto it. So I don't think it's an exclusively Christian thing. But I think there's a lot of Christian moms out there who are like, I am going to homeschool my 5 kids at the same time. And they were all different ages. And I'm like, well, you know what? What do I know? Maybe that's going to work out for them. But geez, I wouldn't sign up for that. That seems like a lot. So I feel like, folks who are in the homeschooling camp are very keen and validated by these.
Mhm.
Oh, well, you know what they're going to teach your kids in school. You don't know, do you? Oh, well, you like,
Yeah.
Schools are they're not mysterious.
Yeah, you can probably write a note to your
what we were saying
teacher and
before.
like get a curriculum.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's easy to
saying,
find.
like all this stuff is pretty boring if you look into it. So yeah, like it's all we grew up, depending on how old you are. Now I'm dating myself. All through the late 80s and early 90s, all the way through the thousands, like you hear teachers and media saying, yeah, parents don't go to the PTA meetings, parents don't go to this, parents don't go to that. And then you fast forward a few years, all the parents like, wait, you're been teaching our kids what? It's like, yeah, we have meetings about this weekly where you can find the stuff out and you can know, and you can have your input, like, oh, change this, change that, obviously within reason. But now they're acting like it's just a big surprise. Like, wait, you've been teaching our kids what for how long? It's like, where were you all this time? This has been in your face.
Right. And we think about these things of like education and like the right, parents are obviously entitled to give the education they want to give to their children. That's fine. But it requires like your present effort. And even though homeschooling, it might sound appealing to some people in America, that isn't a real thing for I want to say for most people in America, right? Most parents work jobs. Most parents are very busy, and just because like you said earlier, most parents don't even bother to go to the parents teacher night. How will they even perform a curriculum and teach to their children, right? So it's not like accessible. It's only accessible to those with the privilege to do it. And it kind of just falls down to like how this speaks mostly to how our society is built currently, like the current economic situation and like opportunities are like available for some parents. And now that the school system for some reason is getting so politicized, it is just like that sort of inaction that parents have over the years, plus the politicization of schools and literally random strangers who don't even have children going into these conferences and getting positions on school boards. It just, of course, why wouldn't you think that schools are run by lizard men? Like, yeah.
You make a really good point, Void Boy, and I, far be it from me to blame the parents, but well, here I go. That if we had more engagement, and I'm guilty, I let my wife do most of the engagement for my daughter's school. Like I don't necessarily step up to the plate on everything, but if more parents did say a bare minimum, then the one or two really whacked out people would stand out as being just one or two really whacked out people. But because, whether it's for lack of time or lack of interest or just not a priority, there's sort of been a space left. And I, as a parent, bear a bit of responsibility because I'm not there. I guess I'm leaving a space for some nutcase to show up and make the PTO that much more political or concerned about lizard men or whether or not lizard men are qualified to teach our children. I don't know. If the lizard man has the appropriate degrees and seems to do well with the children, I don't think I really care if he's a lizard man.
If they get here in spaceships, I'm fairly confident in their math ability and physics, to be honest. I feel like they probably have some good teachers.
They have something to teach us. One other thing I want to add, this is a book banning has also been a kind of big thing, and that is also connected to the whole don't teach my kids about anything about queer related or trans. I've read the statistics, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. About 60% of all the book bans that have been successful in America were done by about 10 to 11 people. That's goofy. Like it takes a small amount of just not like it's easy. It's just persistent. It takes a small amount of really persistent people to just make like a change that just ruins everybody's time.
Also, once again, talking to parents, if you want to hide things like the existence of gay people from your kids, all that's going to happen is they're not going to trust you when it comes up later because they've seen you already dodging the topic. like it's a great way to strain your relationship with your kid. Just talk about it.
But I also think that it's a cheap and quick way to get people excited and scared by saying, "Oh, think of the children. Oh, there are gay books out there. Yeah, I'm sure they're gay. Well, they're in your kid's library and they're coming to get your kid." That any conspiracy theory can be boring. Like, oh, there's aliens. Okay, sure, cool, and they're gonna come abduct your kid in the middle of the night. That's the cheap and easy way to make a entire conspiracy theory more interesting by making your children the target of whatever nefarious actor.
Oh, hello, blood libel. What are you doing hanging out here? Like, there's also the old historical anti-Semitic element of they're coming to get your kids. We should keep in mind that 100% feeds into like QAnon adrenochrome stuff and grooming conspiracy theories. So let's not forget that.
Well, and I think that you said it.
Transition here as well. I'm sorry. I was going to say there's a tradition here as well. They're coming for your kids. Goes back to the Satanic Panic. If you remember heavy metal in the U.S. and mid-America, when that genre starts to hit in the mid-'80s. I mean, heck, the last season of Stranger Things is about this. They're like, wait, this the music the kids listen to, it sounds satanic because a few people said it sounds satanic. So then the bands lean into it because that gives us an edge. Of course, we're going to just play into the dark and everything like that. But they're doing it for theater. They're doing it for fun. But now right-wing evangelicals, conspiracy theorists can use like, no, they're indoctrinating our kids through the music. And if you play it backwards and if you do this, and they were attributing real murders to this music, and people were going to prison for things that they weren't actually doing, all based on they're coming for our kids' fear doctrine. Like it always comes back to that in some way, and it's terrifying.
Also, let's not forget that like satanic symbols are never described in the Bible, and they're just some things people made up and started saying to each other.
The number of people I have seen in comments citing Dante's Inferno as if it were a book they forgot to jam in at the end of the Bible is it leaves me upset. I'm disappointed with it when I see it.
Like that's literal fan fiction.
Right? Which again, it's fine until you start saying, "Well, you're guilty of the 7 deadly sins." I'm like, there's 7. It's 10 commandments, not 7 deadly.
Other than 666, I don't think there's like a single satanic symbol I can think of that is in the Bible.
But we should. So you mentioned QAnon. And one thing I just want to say about QAnon, I don't want to give it too much air, is that it really is an amalgam of many conspiracy theories, often to suit certain political groups and parties. And they frequently lean on the kids are in danger as a way of keeping their folks engaged. But like, it's at once new and not new. And I feel like it's just sort of become the internet soup. So like, I feel like QAnon itself is a manifestation of what I saw when I was in seminary school, that I saw these sort of spaces that didn't have enough participation for, normal purposes. So they just became a ground where if you threw out a conspiracy theory, either you got crickets or you got people who agreed with you. So I don't, I try to keep in mind what's dangerous and what's not, but when they interweave so much, it's very hard to keep track of. And you mentioned the grooming conspiracy theory, which the idea is that your kid's teacher wants to make your kid gay and they will somehow groom your kid into being gay or trans or queer or whatever. That this conspiracy theory is like new, but like you said, it's also not. And one of the ways I've been able to keep, I'm going to reveal an insider secret today. One of the ways I've been able to keep automod ahead of the game is by watching what QAnon is talking about and watching the words they're using and adding words like groomer to our automod filter. That as cool as QAnon or people who associate with QAnon might think they are, they've been a very effective way for me to stay ahead of the curve and to make sure that our auto moderator is prepared for what shenanigans comes next. I found QAnon to be very repetitive and very boring after a very short period of time. Because like I said, it's just grabbing from other places. But I'd be curious to know if you got what your guys' thoughts on QAnon are, or if you think it's even worth discussing, which is equally considerable.
I mean, it's worth discussing right now, always. I feel like it comes up all the time. I joked with one of our listeners at one point that this episode was probably going to be me mentioning QAnon at some point, so congrats. Yeah, I think that as you say, it gets boring with time. I think the reason it's doing that is
we should talk about the start. I've been paying attention to this for a long time, but we should talk about Q. That on 4chan, there are many accounts that are anons, and that they just call themselves anons. Like Redditors call each other Redditors. They're anonymous too. They just call each other anons. And there were all sorts of weird anons, Pentagon anon, White House anon, Chief of Staff anon, and QAnon, which was supposed to be a reference to some sort of Q clearance, was basically the meme that took. And that there were two sets of people. There were a set of people watching these drops, which are basically just short text, somewhere between poems or word salad, depending.
Yeah, they're usually like cryptic references to things that will happen soon, and they like.
Well, that's how they're taken.
Storm and whatnot. Yeah.
Well, and I feel like there's a meeting place between the way people read those Q drops, which were probably by the person is really unimportant. I forget his name, honestly, but it
was like the
I
former
feel like they had
CEO of
something
8Q or something.
Right. That and the Bible had something in common, that it was something you could, what some people call bake, that you could apply gematria to the Bible, or you could, read special things in these Q drops, and then that was going to unlock the future for you. And this to me seems like the modern iteration of what might be called secret religions in the past. But that some people get very compelled by this stuff and really pulled into it to the exclusion of healthy life sometimes.
Yeah, because there's the idea that you're in on secret esoteric knowledge. And there's usually in Q circles, there's a sort of messianic complex around Trump. Trump is going to break down the barrier, etc. And this
it's a very pseudo-Christian place, and they do talk about the devil quite a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's a side effect of the fact that Trump brought in a lot of new voters who never felt heard, and that's a very real thing. And so these people thought that their time had come, and many of them responded to this sort of rhetoric as if it was speaking to them directly, because they felt appealed to in a way that they hadn't before, right? And so it's very easy for that to move into this quasi-religious. No, explicitly religious rhetoric. And I think what's really interesting about QAnon is that it talks about a very imminent thing that has to come, right? It has to rely on movement consistently. And because of that, there's constantly the setting of dates that things are supposed to happen, and there's retconning when those things don't happen. And there is watching the news and forecasting based on the news, or reading the news into either progress that's being made or counter progress, right? But the reason I think it's getting boring, as Broclen says, is there's only so far you can take this when things don't happen. It's sort of like
the great disappointment that you set a date and it doesn't happen, that people have been. Paul thought Jesus was coming next Tuesday, so even since Paul, people have been disappointed that 3 days is not the standard return for Jesus.
We all know at least one anti-masker who's they won't silence us still now that the mask mandates are gone, right? People can hang out on these things, but they start to become loud voices in a quiet place, right? I think that the issue with QAnon is it is issue from their perspective, not from ours. From our perspective, it's shrinking is probably a good thing. But the difficulty QAnon has as a self-perpetuating conspiracy theory, and the reason it's shrinking at this point is you can only promise people so much and then not give it before the costs kick in that they've been building up over
You can
time.
only kick the can down the road so far, and like you can only push a good meme so far, and I feel like if they pushed the QAnon meme so incredibly far, why would you think you could push it further? But we'll see. November's coming, and I feel like that's the thing with QAnon. It really is about certain political groups. that like it's not about JFK or 9/11 or aliens. That it's about certain political groups, and that's maybe the people who are drawn into it. How are we doing for time? I know we got messed up with our start. I have a few more historical things we could dig into, but I don't want to take your time for granted, gentlemen.
Whatever you
I think
want.
we're at right around an hour since I actually got on, so sorry.
Yeah, about an hour.
Okay. Cool. So something I wanted to mention, and feel free to come. I feel like I've researched QAnon a lot, and I could talk about it a lot, so I'm trying really hard not to. So what I want to talk about is these sort of historical conspiracy theories. So I want to take two and pair them together. JFK and his assassination, something that I was not alive for, and 9/11, something that I was very much alive for, was not in New York, but was much closer to New York than a lot of people were. And I did see the second plane hit on TV live. So like, I feel like these two are like the conspiracy theory juggernauts that really stand on their own and don't succumb to some of the things others do. So, there's been no shortage of people that use 9/11 as a reason for Islamophobia. I hope no one's shocked by that. If you are shocked, I'm sorry. Take a deep breath, drink water. But I feel like 9/11 was more likely, if it was spun on anyone, it was frequently George Bush, a white guy, the president at the time. And if not him, well, then probably the Jews, because I'm sorry, like we said before, it always seems to come back to the Jews.
I've seen all three of these things frequently.
Whereas, I'm less educated on the JFK thing because it's been going, since the day he was shot to today, people have been talking about it. But it never seemed to get caught into anything racist. It never seemed like I think the worst was, quote, the CIA wanted to take him down for reasons we don't understand, or maybe they wanted him done because he was Catholic. But it wasn't, it was different. And I think it was more shared. I wonder if it was a more shared conspiracy, maybe more balanced conspiracy, or there was less room for the conspiracy to grow because everyone was part of it. Everyone had a memory of JFK's assassination if they were, cognizantly of age by then, and many of us could be aware of 9/11 and saw the event, which is why I think 9/11 depends on the background stuff, not the stuff everyone saw.
JFK's death is usually considered to be the most watched death in history.
Most to talk about so far.
That's Jesus Christ. Let's be real here.
Or was it? Complicated issue. There's conspiracy theories. There's people who say that the resurrection was itself a conspiracy theory. So
I'm sorry,
obviously I don't share that view.
Dank Kennedy and memes right now. Anyway, JFK's death was one of the first major political assassinations of a world leader that was captured on film and seen within a day around the world. It was a huge deal. JFK was popular within the United States. He was popular abroad. And there was a general optimism came with his presidency in both arenas. And it popped right away, right? And what I think kicks off the conspiracy theories more than anything is that Lee Harvey Oswald was then shot before anything could really happen. He was arrested and then shot as he was being led through a hallway. So what I think more conspiracy theories spawn from than anything is the fact that everyone saw this. It seemed wild to everyone and shattered so many ideas about where the world was going. And the person who most likely did it was killed before anyone heard from him anything. And so if you're someone who thinks that like nefarious forces are silencing people, this is a great thing to look at and find exactly that story, right? So I think that's what does it. And 9/11, for similar reasons, it shattered a general post-Cold War optimism that Americans had with something that everyone watched on TV. The fact there was a second plane meant that people went to watch their TV after the first one and saw the second hit and knew something was happening immediately. That's why these events are so powerful. It's because of the television and the
so I'm going to hop in real quick with my terrible delay. Two things. Right. I 100% agree with everything you just said. Those are pretty much the points that I'm going to hit. But it usually reminded me. So I was in high school. I was a sophomore in high school when 9/11 happened. I remember listening. I had my headphones on in my first period of class, and I remember listening to whatever radio station I had on, because it was a free period, that first period I had. And I remember they announced on the radio, hey, a plane just hit one of the World Trade Center towers. We don't know what's going on. We're getting news updates, cameras, et cetera, et cetera. So we had TVs in every classroom, like just mounted up. So I told the teacher, hey, turn the signal, something's going on in New York right now. And so we watched as a class the second plane hit. Not 15 minutes later, soon after, one of our teachers, who had to be calmed down because he was freaking out so bad, was literally running through the hallways going, it's happening, war's happening, they're coming to get us, they're coming. Like, he just kept repeating that over and over again. And we in high school, we thought it was just funny. It's like, all right, he's freaking out. But I remember, like, now I'm thinking as an adult, like, there were a lot of adults that had that exact same reaction because we were all trying to wrap our heads around what we just saw. And yes, it was very tragic and like like we all saw this big tragic event happen at the same time, and we're trying to compute and put it together. And so we start to ignore the quote unquote obvious. And I rewind back to the JFK assassination because there's a part of that happens there. I remember seeing and reading all the time one of the conspiracies were there had to be a second shooter because Oswald couldn't have shot him at that trajectory, at that angle, because that's not how cars work, et cetera, et cetera. And then it got debunked to me. It's like, no, the president was sitting like on a mounted chair that was built into the car because it was a parade car. That's why the trajectory is different from you see from any other car. So many people ignore that and go, no, there just had to be a second shooter. It's like, no, again, the answer is right in front of your face. You just want to ignore it. So if we jump back now to 9/11, where you get to jet fuel can't melt steel beams, and everybody's saying it's like, no, they kind of can because of how these buildings are built and just the amount of force and all sorts. Like, you have the answers, and then you just have a bunch of people going no. And just once you get to a stalemate of people just ignoring the facts, that's where conspiracy theories bounce from. Because what else is there if you just got people just ignoring the obvious answer?
I think you pointed to something, and I didn't realize. So your story and my story are very similar, but I was in gym class, and I think my gym teacher was not handling it well. What I remember her saying was, those of you who pray, now is the time to do that. So we left the gym and were brought into the cafeteria where we watched and shortly thereafter saw the second plane hit the World Trade Center. And I think that, we kids are used to not knowing what the fuck was going on, and these adults were not. And that we were having a different, like, what's the World Trade Center? What? I remember when I found out that the World Trade Center had already been bombed like a decade or so previous by maybe even the same guy. That your perspective on these events can, everyone has a different perspective, and I feel like that makes a very unique soup. So I don't want to cut off Castor Troy, but I also I have historical questions for Jacob, but I don't want to be leaving any.
Go the historical route.
All right, no conspiracies left behind. I want to try to cover as many as we can. I feel like we did a good job on QAnon without overdoing it. So I want to talk to you, Jacob, about one of the biggest conspiracies, because it applies to so many things, or maybe nothing at all. The false flag, the usually military event maybe unplanned disaster of some sort that was in fact quite planned and deliberately to make the other side or some side look bad. So, like, the only time I'm thinking of is the burning of the Reichstag, when I believe it was Hitler's folks who burned the Reichstag and said, "Oh my God, look at what these
we don't know
just
who
did."
We don't know who burned the Reichstag to this day.
Okay, so we don't.
But,
so is that so that's a conspiracy theory I've been believing for a
little
while.
bit.
See,
But
I'm learning about
Hitler
myself.
definitely like mobilized it for the purpose of blaming the communists. Hitler did another one though. I mean, there is a false flag regarding the invasion of Poland, in which the Polish supposedly attacked on the German side a small station, and then the Germans responded with military action.
I remember hearing
that is considered, that is 100% a false flag. That
I remember hearing that the Gulf of Tonkin affair was a false flag, that the sinking of the Lusitania might have been a false flag, but no one has ever suggested, as far as I'm aware, that Pearl Harbor was a false flag. And my theory is that, like,
we know
honestly,
the
I don't
Pearl
know.
Harbor story from both government angles at this point. So it's one of those things where you have to,
but it also fits in with a story that we really like. That America, the beast, was awoken and then smote those who were doing bad things, and America.
They poked the bear and the bear responded. That fits with our America,
right?
Very much.
But so, Jacob, to what extent does the idea of a false flag carry weight? Is this something that actually happens historically, or is this just conflation of historical record? And without getting too much of the present, we've seen some modern military interactions where both sides are pointing fingers at each other, and obviously not everyone can be telling the truth. So, how do you think about that as a historian or just a person trying to make sense of history?
So, looking into the deep past, it gets very difficult because obviously we can talk about these things today because we have, you can look up the individual building records of like modern structures and stuff to find who did what when, who owned something and bought it and all that, right? Like, the level of information when we look at modern things is just significantly higher. When we talk about the ancient world or the medieval world or whatever, you just kind of have to pick a historian to trust the word of or not, because I supposedly Genghis Khan, when he sent diplomats to the Khwarezmians, got his diplomats sent back with their faces mutilated. Like, I have no way of assessing if this is true at all. It probably has some truth to it, but like,
there's like a symbolic meaning, whether or not it's actually truth.
Right.
Like, what is it that the Spanish Inquisition, the blood ran ankle deep in the streets? Like, dear God, I hope not. But also, you get the point they're trying to make.
Yeah, but it's sort of one of those things where, you work with a great deal of leeway on historical records. If we talk about early Roman history, right, like everything before the Gallic sack is subject to huge blurred lines. If we talk about, the Three Kingdoms period at the end of the Han Dynasty in China, we're talking about sort of all this Chinese literature that is poured into talking about these events to the point where you have to wade through it in order to get to the historical truth. Like, it is far easier to justify a conspiracy theory in the ancient world.
Let me ask you,
just because of all of this.
Down, because this is something that I get quite a bit, and I'll be honest, it's part of how I moderate. That there are people out there who want to sell the story that Jesus never existed, and I want to clarify that it's not Jesus never did miracles, Jesus was never resurrected, Jesus wasn't the Son of God, like that Jesus as a historical person never existed and was made up, possibly as a conspiracy theory by the Catholic Church, because there are some conspiracy theories that seem to attach to the Catholic Church. So, like, how do we respond?
This is not entertained by like any
But it's essentially the same thing you were describing, that we have, a certain amount of historical record. To find historical truth, you need to do some level of rummaging through that. But like,
right.
how
there is an
do
endpoint to that. We do also have a historical record, right? If someone is talking about something, and you have a number of witnesses, you can talk about
I forced Jacob to defend Christ. Isn't that this is literally playing devil's advocate right here?
you can talk about how much leeway there is, but like the reality is that within a decade of Jesus's time, Paul was writing letters that refer to him as a person who was well known in his circle. Multiple Christian authors, as well as Jewish authors such as Josephus, were writing about him. Roman writers like Tacitus were treating him as a historical figure that started this Jesus movement. And graffiti in the next century.
By the time we find the historical record of Jesus, it's like walking into a room, and instead of having to say Jesus, of Nazareth, Son of God, according to, they're already talking about him to the point where they're not even like, you know who Jesus is. It's understood. Jesus Christ, his followers, the story, that it was understood amongst them.
Paul is 2 degrees of separation, and everyone he talks to is fully convinced this was a person. So,
Well, I want to give air to that, because I know that there are some people who, and Jacob, you're my better half. I think the sort of things that I ban and don't ban, and I think you kind of try to hold my ban hammer back when I'm getting too crazy. But there are folks who come to Dank Christian memes who say, "Hey, I hate to break it to you, but Jesus was not a historical person, did not exist at all, and you believe in a fairy tale." And I remove those comments if Automot hasn't done so for me already. I don't remove the person or anything like that, but I know that there are people who think that. So especially because we have no shortage of atheists hanging out on Dank Christian memes too. I want to make sure we give it breath. Obviously, I'm reasonably convinced. Good enough for me, but obviously I don't want to push that on anyone else. So I want to at least entertain the possibility. But I think you make a really great point, and as a historian, it's a humbling thing. It's like, well, we know what was said, we know what was written down, we know what was on, what was written into stone, not what decayed in papyrus or what have you.
Yeah.
But I do know that there was a conspiracy theory. You may know I'm a fan of John Green, who's one of my favorite non-ministers, but he was very influential in the early internet. He was a CompuServe moderator, and he was very into a conspiracy theory that the Catholic Church had stolen time, that we were actually living in the 15
time hypothesis.
Yeah, and I was like, that seems that's unique. I haven't seen that before.
It's actually, are you familiar? Yes, it's actually funny that you bring this up, because it's going to release after this one because we're slower to edit. But just the other day on History Nerds Conversation Parlor, we were chatting with Overly Sarcastic Productions, and we talked about exactly this conspiracy theory.
Right, yeah. we're theming with our what I boldly call our sister podcasts.
Yeah, I've heard of the phantom time hypothesis, and it is the most Eurocentric thing I've ever heard. If you think that the Pope, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Byzantine Emperor can come together and make up several centuries of history and have that apply to everyone's history on every continent, you should probably lay off the paint. It's just, sorry.
Go touch grass. You're experiencing something that needs to pass by.
That's some real that's some necessary grass touching. It's goofy. It's goofy because people fall for
it's
this
so
stuff
fun. It's fun.
Yeah,
but
because for them, because it's centered, like you said, it's Eurocentric. It centers around them. It makes them feel important, and I feel like that's where a lot of these conspiracy theories
validation,
their hooks. Yeah, people want to feel important whenever we mentioned like massive historical events, like the assassination of JFK and the 9/11 attacks. When catastrophic major historical events happen to us, we realize that we are not like important in the grand scheme of things, right? When serious stuff happens in the world, we are insignificant. And there's a helplessness, and there's like a feeling of like, what is my place in the world? Like I can just die, and I've been like a part of some sort of weird government plan, or some sort of like, my death is negligible, right? And that drives people to like, I want to feel important somehow. I want to write myself in this like canon of history, and conspiracy theories are some sort of vehicle for that. Like they make you feel like you're in on something, that you're like, no, I know the truth. I know what's really going on. When in reality is that, nobody knows what's going on. Human beings are making decisions constantly all the time, and we have no part in that.
So I had a stat that I want to share, but now I can't find it. So I guess I'm just going to call it a conspiracy and move on. I think it was at the end of a PBS review or something.
Deep State is removing the statistics from Broclen. So
they are. Oh, the Deep State wants me to shut up so badly. If only I would listen. No, that the I lost track of it now. I think the Catholic Church might have stolen my time. I think my brain may be melted from discussing the conspiracy theories.
You're doing it.
They erased the memory of Tartaria existing in your childhood.
Okay, so I have seen statistics that suggest that like quite a few people believe in conspiracy theories, and I've mentioned that I try to temper my distaste. But I try to reconcile this acknowledgement that most folks believe in some kind of conspiracy theory. So like trying to stamp out conspiracy theories is not a practical thing to do. So I want to question, to what extent are conspiracy theories just the folklore of our day, and, we're not checking it against the news? And do you believe in any conspiracy theories, or have you? Like I said, I don't think I ever fully believed in the aliens, but I needed to there's a level of suspension of disbelief required to enjoy the UFO shows. So like, at least while watching it, I needed to sort of believe, oh, maybe they are going to come into my bedroom if I have a window in my bedroom, or that sort of thing.
My end. So on my end, to answer that question, it kind of goes back to what was said earlier, like when you brought up, it depends on how you're phrasing the question. So when we ask people, do you believe in aliens? And you have to specify, are we talking about the Greys, the Martian men, or are we just talking about life outside of extraterrestrial life? That could be a bacteria, that could be some sort of animal, just anything that lives outside of Earth. So yes, and when I say I believe in conspiracy theories, I believe in something like that, where it's like, yeah, of course, governments and entities of that ilk, whether it's not a full-fledged government, but like something that with a powerful entity, or just organization of people. Yeah, I'm sure they conspire and kind of put plans into motion to see what works and what doesn't behind the scenes all the time. Do I think that every conspiracy is some global nefarious act? No, it could literally just be a conspiracy like, hey, these two companies got together. We want to put a target in this town. How do we figure that out? And they got to do some stuff behind the scenes that make that happen. That might have nothing to do with targets. Like, oh, let's just get like a district guy that works for the schools, and let's get like some PR people that work in this other area, and they just so happen to have the best interest of having big box stores in this area, and that side of thing kicks into motion. But I don't think like, oh no, the government's conspiring to put like chemicals in the smokestacks that make us all impotent. Like that's where I believe that that's where the line of my conspiracy theory like thinking goes. It's like, no, of course, people in power that we just don't know are, of course, they're conspiring to put things into motion that basically probably benefit them, usually monetarily. But anything beyond that, I'm like, no, because one, just to be cynical and frank about it, people are too stupid. You can't get that many people together to accomplish something without it just falling apart, which is why the conspiracies we know were either successful or they fell apart because nobody could pull it off.
Or they lasted a short time. Like the big one I could think of is the Manhattan Project, where, it was a highly secretive endeavor, but it also they did not have to sustain the secrecy forever. There was a moment it was about to be very public, right? So,
but also, and look what they did to make it happen. I mean, there's a big budget movie about it now. They had to like get everything. Hey, we need to move all of you to the desert for like 8 months. It's like, just shut up. We're all going to just lock in and do this. Try to do that now. He just looks at me like, it could never freaking happen. So yeah, that's where my
satellites would pick it up and everything. Yeah.
For me, I'm always trying to watch that scale, and like if conspiracy theories can be fun, I want to have that fun. You know, I look at the Area 51 festival, and I'm like, I probably would have enjoyed being there for an hour. Probably the second hour, I would have wished I was not there. But but like, you know, there's something fun about this, and there is something almost communal, sort of communal adjacent about it. But I do know that this, like, it breaks up families. Like, you know, some relatives, they get so deep into this stuff, and whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, it doesn't even matter, that it becomes their personality and they can no longer relate to their family members. And I think that's tough. That if any of these theories are
that I can't talk to now, there are family members that I can't talk to now because they think that the COVID vaccination was a massive government conspiracy. And they run up against that block of when you ask them, one, to what end, and two, how do we watch a government conspiracy play out in public on a global scale? And they have no answer for that. They just know something about this, to them, something doesn't feel right about this. And they've literally just started cutting people off because they think we've injected ourselves with 5G radio waves that are tracking us. Like, it's
my favorite conspiracy theory about the pandemic, which I feel like everyone knows, so we don't really need to talk about them, but my favorite is that the injection is actually a microchip to track you. And I'm like, everyone has a phone. Yeah. I already have a microchip that tracks me. I pay money
the guppies know exactly to track where me. I am right now.
I have a family. I use a family tracker. That's a feature. I ask them to do that. This is like... It feels like an old conspiracy theory that someone forgot to update before they reused it.
Just like they forgot to update their phone.
This isn't like a conspiracy theory per se, but this is something I've been noticing people are doing because they're scared. Have you noticed when you are on social media, when somebody wants to use the word death or murder or assassinated or suicide, they will say the word unalive?
Yes. I always assumed that was to avoid people like me who are like, ooh, I should be careful to filter for suicidal language.
Especially on like TikTok and whatnot, where there's a heavy government oversight going on, right? Like,
yeah, and a lot of people are saying that the algorithm doesn't really work like that. Like, you can say suicide and murder and sexual assault. It's just that people are so paranoid that they.
I do see people talking about it very openly.
Yeah, so I think it's probably
weird because. I guess because as a member, or not even a member, like, you know, someone that peruses Black Twitter, like when that was still a very active, popular thing, that was just like a slang term. Like, it was just like a cool, it was like, oh, we don't want to type out murder or suicide or something like that. So people just jokingly put, oh, he got unalive. So that way it wouldn't get flagged. They're like, but it was like a joking way to say that. But then as it kind of just became a part of, you know, online vernacular, this conspiracy theory part was like, oh, they're doing it because this and that. And again, the obvious answer there is like, no, it was just kind of like a joke turn of phrase about morbid stuff.
Right.
We've been doing that.
In my age group, it's often, in my age group, it's often oof, and we all just know it's a Roblox reference. So, you know, you know, you got oof.
There's a lot of history on that oof. But it's obviously a simple answer, but then people want to attach, no. It's this massive algorithm thing, or it's like this huge program, they're listening to you, and it's like, no, I don't think they care that much. And even that, I've seen TikToks where the word suicide was written down, and you can see it. But the person just said unalive, when I can clearly see the words. Like, I have glasses with eyes to see. Like, it's kind of goofy. And it gets even more infuriating when somebody was I saw one that were talking about Martin Luther King, and they were saying like, oh, he was unalive, and I'm like, do you no, we're not doing this. We're not going to
say assassination. It's a historical political term.
Yeah, call it what it is. Don't say unalive because it just sounds goofy. And I think that's what conspiracy theories just do to you at the end. They just make you look like a goofy goober.
Okay, and I want to seize on the goofy goober for just a moment. So we have actually discussed in a couple different ways the conspiracy theory that mods or a certain subset of mods control Reddit. We actually did an interview with Reddit mods so they could describe this. Okay, so they told us we made that up. It was a funny joke. We started sharing we are the mod Illuminati. You know, we team up. They do mod summits, whatever. So it was just a joke, and then people heard it and took it too far. I feel we have complete evidence now after Reddit made its API changes. Many mods rebelled, and the mods that rebelled and took their subs private, either they changed it back or they were removed by people of Reddit's choosing. So I feel like the conspiracy theory that mods run Reddit has completely been dissolved, and that no Reddit runs Reddit, and maybe that everyone seems to agree Reddit sucks. It's just a matter of who we're blaming it on. That maybe that's the real conspiracy theory. Who can I blame for the social media meltdown?
I'll compromise here. As one of the other Reddit moderators in here, I'll compromise that I do kind of believe that conspiracy theory, because there are definitely moderators that have a massively outsized influence on the site, and obviously the Reddit admins can kick them out whenever they want. That's what they did.
Well, we've also seen a shift in. So I don't browse Reddit as much as I used to, but like certain subs we're not used to seeing float to the top have started floating to the top.
Yeah.
So you're right. There are those that like seem to come, but there's also like there seems to be a lot of mostly females for some reason saying, "Hey, do I look okay?" And I'm just really surprised to be finding this on Reddit. I'm not used to this. I'm like, why would anyone ask me? How am I seeing this? What am I caught up in? So I feel like, and I think you're right. So like, if we look at a subsection,
I've been in group chats before where there are definitely moderators of communities I never thought would interact, like mass arranging things. And, you know, I do think that there's some reality to that perception. It is just normal behavior. It's what you do when you're in charge of communities. You organize with others. You organize for the interests of your communities. And I feel like even framing it as a conspiracy theory in the first place gives it a little bit of a disservice, because this is just community moderating practice. But
we cover up how influential we are.
It happens. It's not like it's not there, right? There are people who are very
people say Jesus isn't real. I remove that comment, so I am in effect like sort of the conspiracy theory come to life. And the call was coming from inside the house. It turns out I did it. I'm sorry, but like I said, I like to give it that consideration. I'm not afraid to put the spotlight. Am I the Illuminati? Have I been the Illuminati this whole time? I'm so sorry, guys.
We're both Illuminati. We're just chilling here together with different ideas about how the Illuminati works.
And I feel like that's, if I were an archaeologist, historian coming to Reddit for those communities, I'd be like, oh, that's St. Jacob. He seems to control everything. I can't escape him. Like,
true.
And much like we are the largest Christian sub on Reddit, so like,
true.
If you're looking for Christian stuff,
1%. We're in that site 1%. There's no getting around it.
Just barely, but we're not getting huge exposure, and that's probably for the best. But it's the they that makes the conspiracy, or it's the secret that makes it. Not so much that mods control everything, but that we keep it secret together so no one knows. Whereas I try to share a little bit so people know.
Yeah, it's not a secret so much as not transparent, I would say.
Well, and anytime someone wants a view towards how boring modding is, I'm happy to take you. I will share my screen, and you may have a lovely nap. If you're suffering from insomnia, I can help you. You can watch me moderate. It will be horrible.
Watch the reports build up on the thing people don't like. That's basically what it is.
Post I don't like, must report it with non-full sentences.
Yeah.
So I feel like we've done a pretty good job of running the gambit. We've covered 9/11, JFK, aliens. We've covered some of the more modern health stuff. We've covered schools and day coming for your kids. We got some false flag. Are we missing anything? Have I actually? We talked about QAnon, which technically includes everything. So by proxy, we've talked about everything. Is there anything we're missing in this big world of conspiracies?
I think we've actually hit everything, and that might be the problem, because now we are definitely on a list of some sort for every conspiracy theory group.
Right.
Yeah.
They're
Nobody
like,
has said the word
I don't know.
Freemasonry, so I'm saying it now.
Oh, right. Okay. So Freemasons rule the country. Can't forget about that. I saw that one in The Simpsons, and I was like, what? No, as an adult, I'm like, oh, I get it now. Well, I think that, I try to challenge myself to make fun of the belief and not the believer, which, is not perfect. I definitely admit. But I also do I do want to be here for fun. When these conspiracy theories are fun, whether it's a fun TV show, whether it's a Wikipedia article that looks like a sick concert that I kind of wish I could have gone to. I am trying to be more sympathetic and not, be so, what's the phrase, worked up about conspiracy theories. That said, I am really thankful that we don't seem to encounter, knock on wood, this is what I'm knocking on it, that, we stay pretty on topic on Dank Christian memes. And other than, like I said, debating, did Jesus really exist sometimes? We're pretty clear on that. So I count us as very lucky there. Any final thoughts? Anything you guys want to share as we're sort of wrapping things up here?
I got thinking thoughts in my head. Conspiracy theories are something that will always haunt us. It's always going to plague us as a society, because I think no matter what happens, people always want easy, simple answers to incredibly complex situations, whether it's cultural, historical, or just how the world that we're living on, how it is. People just want the really easy, snappy, catchy that resonates with them and actually puts them at the center. And that's really the danger thing about conspiracy theories, and why we should always be, mindful that we are not immune to things like propaganda and conspiracies. We should always think about, is it helpful? Does it make sense? Is it necessary? Once you dig into a subject, you quickly realize that the answers are kind of more complex and, boring. It's not as exciting. You are not the Naruto protagonist of your Sasuke, drama. So, yeah, just don't go goofy. Don't go crazy. Don't go too in deep in conspiracy theories. Don't be a goof.
Well, and all the goofs, listening, let's share the things we can enjoy. That aliens are neat, and we all kind of like talking about aliens, whether it's green, gray aliens crash landing, or being at Area 51, or maybe some mold on an asteroid somewhere that would sound kind of neat to learn about. But if you guys are good, I think I'm going to read the show notes. Thank you so much for sharing the conversation. I think we covered them. If we missed any conspiracy theories, I am actually asking for them now. You may share them in comments. I won't remove them. So if you want to share a conspiracy theory that is not harmful and anti-Semitic, we'd love to hear it. So thank you. This has been the Dank Christian Memes podcast. If you're interested in joining our live recordings, you can find a link to our Discord in the description. Our music is provided by I Love Tiger. Thanks so much for listening. This one has especially been a little crazy. And until next time, may the memes bless you and keep you.
Wait to the waves of the stereo. Wait to the waves of the stereo. This is my sanctuary, and we are my savior.